Just like every other Halloween, my brother and I were just as excited as the other children. However, that night was somewhat extra special for us. We had just gotten our bicycles that year, which meant that we could go farther than our usual route for trick-or-treating. Aside from that, our parents were both out of the country, and our uncle, who was asked to look over us, was already too drunk to do so. At the time, we were as free as we could get. We might have been a bit too excited since we put on our costumes a little too early, and my makeup was already washed up by my sweat before we even went out. I was supposed to dress up as an undead paperboy, but I ended up looking just like a regular delivery kid that was too young to get hired. So I just added a gas mask with my costume for no reason. My brother was a mashup of Freddy Krueger, long sleeves, with a Jason mask. He was in it for free candy. Never really cared about the costume. We met up with a few of our friends from the block, and we started knocking on the doors. As usual, some of them were really into the holiday and gave out some tasty treats. One of the reasons why I used to like this night was how the entire neighborhood would look. I loved scary and creepy things in general. Our neighborhood may not have that much to offer, but they did give in to the holidays with their displays. Some even had huge props in their yards, while others expressed their creativity through the elaborately carved jack-o'-lanterns. After a couple of hours, we were done covering the entire neighborhood, and our small baskets were half full. Of course, we went out prepared for this special night. We brought 2 extra bags with us, and we were determined to fill all of them before we headed home. We went out of our vicinity and wandered elsewhere, but only 4 of us were on bikes, so our other friends decided to call it a night. The 2 boys who went with us had been hopping from one neighborhood to another for a long time, so we just simply followed where they went. After less than an hour of biking, we went inside a town that looked even better than ours. I thought that our town was already good when it comes to their Halloween setups, but that place was on a totally different level. There were homes that almost looked like haunted houses, covered in thick, fake webs and extravagant light shows that would cause sensitive individuals to seizure. There were also big Hollywood-like props in the yards that moved. They were pretty expensive automations that were dressed or made for the occasion. Needless to say, I was in awe when I arrived. I felt like I had just stepped into a horror haven, and I couldn't get my wide smile off my face. If these people would spend that much on their props that they would only use once a year, I could already imagine the amount of treats they must be giving. And my high expectations were met quite dearly. We just went to 5 houses, and the first bag we had was already full. It took our entire neighborhood to get that bag half full. It was like a competition of who would give out the most sweets. The children of these people were running around and already eating their treats. We didn't do that. We liked the idea of bombarding our mouths with different sweets as a sign of accomplishment when we get home after trick-or-treating. It was an unspoken decision for us. I guess these kids had that luxury since there were just too many treats to take within the first few steps from their homes. Even the kinds of sweets we received were different. There were hard chocolates that I haven't even heard of. They would often just take out a huge basket and let us take as much as we could. And then there were those who just placed their huge bowls of treats at their front doors where the owners or prop would suddenly come out to scare the kids once they dig in. There was this house where I was genuinely surprised when I grabbed a handful of candies from the bowl and a hand popped out from below and grabbed my arm. They were really into the holiday that some of the homeowners even had heavy prosthetics on them, and a few, maybe a little too much, that it was borderline insane. I was really having the best trick-or-treat night I have ever had. We were jumping from house to house and having our fill. Other kids would bump and push us like a mob of hyperactive children high on sugar, but it was fun and we didn't mind joining the ruckus of it all. We went with the flow and just followed the kids as they ran around. At that point, we already had 2.5 bags full of candy. We could have called it a night. We should have. But we decided to go on because we really didn't want that fun night to end. We said that we would head home with 3 full bags, and now that it became easy and possible, we were driven by greed. As we went further and further, the distance between the houses were getting longer and longer, and the trees surrounding the area were getting thicker. The kids we were trick-or-treating with got fewer and fewer until all of them decided to head back a few moments later. All of them, except one. Unlike the other kids who had costumes that leaned more to being adorable and funny, this kid that remained with us was wearing a costume that was actually quite creepy. He was wearing a skull mask that was too big for him, covering his entire head and neck. He was in pajamas that was covered with red stains, and he was hugging a sack against his chest that was dripping with blood. My brother told him that something must have spilled inside a sack, but he did not respond. My brother and I and our 2 friends decided to keep on going, and the kid just tagged along. By the looks of it, we assumed that he wasn't from around here either. We put our sacks on the baskets attached to our bikes, and the kid was small, so I decided to let him ride with me. I told him that he should just put his sack on the basket as well so that he could hold on properly, since I sat him between me and the basket in front of my bike. But he aggressively refused to let go of his sack. I decided to just pedal steadily so this hard-headed kid wouldn't fall off, and then I noticed that he was oddly light. If I didn't know better, I would say that the sack he was carrying was even heavier than him, because it was somewhat putting off my balance on the side where he put it. A few moments later, we could no longer see any houses nearby, so we already thought about going back. But the kid pointed us uphill that was covered by trees. We thought that he wasn't from around here, but it seemed it wasn't the case. I asked him if there were any more houses around in the area, and he just kept on pointing at that direction. My brother asked him if he was from around here, but he still refused to speak. It looked like he was really eager to go on, and so we just went with him. The path was rough and a bit steep, so we had to walk and just leave our bikes. And as we climbed further, a huge open gate was revealed to us. The kid was right. There really was one more house up there, and it was even bigger than the ones we had visited. We decided to walk inside the property since the gate was wide open anyway. The property didn't look like it had an impressive design for Halloween at first, but I was so wrong. It didn't have pumpkins or jack-o'-lanterns, ambient lightings, or large-scale Halloween automations, but the few things it had were the most daring and straight-out creepy displays I had ever seen. Just a few steps at the front of the porch, there was a body of an old lady strung by the neck and hanged to a tree. We stood next to it, and I was totally awestruck by how realistic it looked. Her eyes were almost bulging and her tongue was sticking out. Her skin was turning violet, especially her head. I stared at her face, at her hair, and at the veins on her legs. We were so creeped out and amazed at the same time. I looked at her hands and her fingernails until I decided to touch the tip of one of her fingers. And to my shock, the tip of her finger was dead cold. I didn't want to sound like a fool to my brother and our friends, but in my head, I was already thinking that it wasn't just a remarkably impressive prop. My mind kept on telling me that this old lady was an actual dead body. One of our friends decided to roam the property on his own to check if anyone was around. We just stayed there, stared at what could be an actual corpse. I was about to mention this to my brother, But then a person suddenly walked out of the front door. He was wearing a full devil mask and a jumpsuit covered in blood, and he carried a large bucket, and then he placed it on the front step. The man waved at us and told us to come forward. Instead of pumpkins, there were 2 skulls at both ends of the doorsteps. I couldn't help not to look closer, since the skulls looked really well made. Despite of the cheap plastic eyeballs badly fitted to the eye sockets, it still looked so real with some bits of flesh still attached to it. Both skulls looked as if they were actual human skulls, played with by a really bad taxidermist. I stared really closely at one of them, and I noticed that the bits in between the teeth really looked like actual gums. At that point, I was completely terrified. These props looked so real to me that it frightened me, even though I was fond of scary and creepy things. I almost jumped out of my shoes when my brother grabbed my shoulder. As I slowly turned my head at the front door, I saw the man in the devil mask staring at me. He asked us to come closer, so we foolishly did. He pointed the bucket to us and said that our treats were submerged there. The bucket was filled with some kind of red liquid. Our friend who remained with us even joked around and said that the candies inside would probably taste like blood, and the mysterious man giggled. He said that it wouldn't be fun if Halloween would just be all about free candies. He told us it wouldn't be called trick or treating if treats were up for grabs and no trick was involved. My brother and I just looked at each other and wondered what the guy was talking about. And the stranger finally explained. He told us that inside the bucket were a bunch of luxurious items that would be more than enough to buy a sack of any expensive candies we like. But mixed into them were filthy and disgusting things. My brother asked what were the filthy things inside the bucket, but he refused to tell, and just said that it wouldn't be fun if we already knew before we take our chances. My brother went first. The red liquid was pretty thick, and there was no way we could see through it. He dunked his hand in and started to feel the bottom of the bucket. A few seconds later, he lifted his hand from the bucket to see what he was able to grab. To our surprise, my brother got a gold ring with a huge diamond on it. It looked genuinely expensive. My brother asked the man if he was serious about giving the diamond ring to him, and he cheerfully nodded. Our friend went next. He kept on looking around as he dipped his arm into the bucket. Our other friend still hadn't returned yet, and he was missing out of this ridiculous opportunity. He lifted his hand up from the bucket, and we looked at what he got. It was another gold accessory. He was able to get a thick golden bracelet studded with diamonds, but there was something weird that came with it. Something was caught at the chains of the bracelet, and it looked like a small chunk of flesh. He just shook it off the bracelet and celebrated, as the masked man said that he could practically buy a used car with it. I wish he didn't do that because I wanted to inspect whatever it was that got caught on the chains, since I was going next. After seeing that, I didn't want to soak my hand into the bucket, but I know that they would tease me for being a coward if I didn't. They both got lucky anyway, so the odds were in our favor. My brother started to call out to our other friend who roamed around earlier. As I started to dip my hand into the bucket slowly, the man in the devil mask suddenly got somewhat bothered, and he asked us if there was someone else with us. I told him that one of our friends walked around on his own, and he was probably on his way back. It was just then that I realized that the kid we were with also disappeared. I couldn't recall if he ever walked inside the property with us. I turned my head and looked around as I started to feel the bottom of the bucket with my fingers. The red liquid was very dense, and so I couldn't really tell what I was touching. There were a bunch of small things in there, and some felt oddly soft and squishy. Just as I grabbed the soft round object and kept on feeling it with my hands, my eyes came across the hanging old lady at the tree again. Scary things started popping inside my head as I was holding this round, soft thing inside the bucket. And then it hit me. It felt like an eyeball. I immediately let go of it and pulled my hand out of the bucket. The masked man asked me what was wrong. He asked why I didn't grab anything from the bucket and insisted that I should try again. Now, I wanted to refuse, but his voice matched with his piercing stare suggested that it would be best not to say no to this man. Hell, I was terrified at what could be at the bottom of the bucket, but I was more terrified of the person who placed those things in there. Besides, I thought that I was probably just scaring myself with these scary ideas that I had had. It was possible that what I held was just another prop that was meant to scare us. As I sunk my arm into the bucket once again, our friend finally came back. He walked slowly toward my brother while his eyes were locked onto the man standing in front of me. He whispered something to my brother. I couldn't even guess what it was about since he was also wearing a Halloween mask and my arm was still inside the bucket. And then my brother walked towards me silently and said to me, "We have to go. Now." Just to get it over with, I grabbed the first thing I touched at the bottom of the bucket. I pulled my arm back up, and I was shocked with what I held in my hands. It was a finger, with part of the bone sticking out from it. There were tiny hairs and their fingernail was intact. It wasn't a prop. It was an actual finger cut off from somebody's hand. I immediately dropped it and the man in the devil mask just casually said that I was unlucky. I backed away and stood beside my brother. The man was calling our friend to try his luck in the bucket, but he said that our parents were waiting for us down the hill. We shouldn't keep them waiting for too long. I mean, of course he was lying. We went here on our own, led by a child that was nowhere to be found. The man kept on insisting, but we just waved and started to walk away calmly and quickly. As we reached the gate, the man started to follow us. Our friend told us not to look back and we should get away from that place quickly. We finally left the property, and we almost tumbled as we hurried our way down to the steep path. The man in the devil mask was still on our tail, still calling to us, and suddenly, as we went farther from him, he started to run towards us. We hurried to our bikes as fast as we possibly could, and started kicking the pedals like our lives depended on it, since it actually was at that point. We were lucky that we were able to escape. As we were on our way, our friend told us that he went to the back of the house and peeked through the window. Inside the house, he saw 2 dead bodies in the living room with their heads cut off. The man in the devil mask was probably the one who killed them. I then noticed the sack on my basket that was dripping with blood. It was the sack that the child refused to let go of. We stopped and hid for a moment to see what was inside of it. We were all completely petrified when we discovered what it was. It was a decapitated head of a young boy. The next day, the house that we went to was covered all over the news. A demented psychopath broke in and killed the entire family. At the location, they found the maid hung to the tree, and the parents were beheaded. They saw the skin from the skulls in the kitchen sink, and the skulls were displayed on the doorsteps like we had seen the night before. The bucket left at the front door contained the fingers, ears, and eyes. They also found the dead body of their son inside his room, but his head was missing. Later that day, we called the police and told them what we knew. We also told them where the head of the boy was, but they didn't believe us when we said how we knew about it. Hell, I couldn't believe it myself either. It was the boy himself who brought it, and he also led us to their home. Perhaps he wanted someone to discover what happened to his family that Halloween. Unfortunately, the sick man who did this to them was not caught, and is still roaming around freely.